Thank you very much. I'd like us to turn to Luke's Gospel and the second chapter. Luke's Gospel and the second chapter. Today I want to talk to teenagers, about teenagers. Those of you who are overgrown teenagers may listen in. Those of you who once were teenagers, you may find it interesting. Those of you who have teenagers, it's absolutely imperative you listen. And those of you who have grandparents who are teenagers, and those of you who may one day be teenagers, there's something for you. Can't think of anybody else who might be around. The term teenager is not found in the Bible, so I don't have a suitable reading for you, but we do know of a particular incident that took place when Jesus was 12. That's pretty close. And what happened in that particular incident, I think, gives us a very keen insight into teenage experience. Luke chapter 2, verse 41. Every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the feast according to the custom. After the feast was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple court, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. I suspect there were probably a lot of other things as well, but they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. Adolescence is a word that we hear used quite often. I was surprised to discover this week that it is a 20th century word. It was invented in this century. Now that does not mean that adolescents have been invented in this century. They've been around ever since there's been anything, I suppose. But the term, which means literally the period of growth to maturity, is relatively new. Now, everybody who has ever been a person and has grown from childhood into adulthood has gone through this remarkable stage called adolescence. And probably if they were honest, they would say it was not the easiest period of their lives. There are some people who feel that things being as they are at the present time, it is probably more difficult to be an adolescent now than it ever was before. Whether that is the case or not, I suppose we have no way of categorically proving. But let's face it, it is not an easy thing to be an adolescent, a teenager. And the question before us today is, given that being the case, what do real teenagers do about it? There are three things I want to suggest to those of you who are teenagers listening to me this morning that you should do. First of all, teenagers, you should consider yourselves very, very carefully, very, very seriously. Secondly, teenagers, you're going to have to control yourselves because there are many, many factors that are going to require some very, very careful decision making, and wrong decisions could be very, very detrimental to you now and later. And thirdly, you're going to have to concern yourself about the way things are going in your life. So that's a very simple outline. Teenagers, consider yourself. Teenager, control yourself. Teenager, concern yourself. Now immediately the teenagers are going to say, what should I consider? And there are three things that I want you to consider about yourself. The first one is, you are a person in process. You have not arrived. You're on the way. You're in that very difficult transitionary stage between childhood and adulthood. There are some aspects of you that you treasure that are still childlike, and sometimes people would even say childish. There are other parts of you that are very mature, very adult-like, and sometimes the uneasy mixing of these things causes you all kinds of difficulties. You are a person in process. The second thing is you are a person under pressure. When you think in terms of process, you're thinking in terms of change. Whenever you think in terms of change, you've got to think in terms of trauma, for the very obvious reason that when you change into something that you haven't been before, you're moving into the unknown, and the unknown always produces some degree of apprehension, trepidation, and trauma. So inevitably, because you're in process, you will be under pressure. But you must always remember this, thirdly, that you are a person with tremendous potential. It is obvious that if you are moving from something to something and you're in a transitionary stage, that to which you are moving is still a potential thing, but it could be potentially great, and therefore you need to consider yourself very carefully in this regard. So there are the three things. Consider yourself a person in process, consider yourself a person under pressure, consider yourself a person with potential. Now let's look at Luke chapter 2, verse 52, where it speaks of Jesus being in transition. You notice the operative word there is that Jesus grew. The Greek word for grow here means to progress, to advance, to move. And the whole idea of adolescence, the whole idea of teenage, is that you're moving through different stages and you're exploring whole new territories. And the idea is that you should progress, that you should advance. Now notice very carefully that there were four aspects of this growth. First of all, it says that he grew in wisdom. I want to suggest to you that that means psychological growth. Don't be put off by the long word. I'll explain exactly what I mean in a moment. Then it says he grew in stature. That means physiological growth. Then it says he grew in favor with God. That means spiritual growth. And then favor with man, that means social growth. Teenager, consider yourself a person in process, growing psychologically, physiologically, spiritually, and socially. Now notice this word wisdom. It's a very important word in the Bible. The Bible says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But Clarence Darrow, the very well-known debater and attorney of a previous generation, said exactly the opposite. I believe that the fear of the Lord is the end of wisdom. What the Bible is saying is this: if the Lord is Lord and is the basis of everything, when you get him in the right place in your thinking and in your life, then life makes sense. What Clarence Darrow said was, if you put the Lord in your life, he is a figment of your imagination and he will retard your development and hinder your growth as a person. Young person, you have to decide. You have to decide. You say, hey, you mean I as a teenager have to sit down and think things through and decide things? Yes, that's exactly what you do, and it is so imperative that you be doing it intelligently during these major transition years. Notice that wisdom, according to James' epistle, can come from two sources. It can come from above, which will lead to great benefits, or it can come from below and can be very, very destructive in your life. Now, what does wisdom mean? First of all, it's more than just learning information. Now, you go to school and they ram all kinds of information down your throat. You go to church and they present all kinds of information to you there. And it seems that you can't do anything without somebody somewhere along the line deciding you need more information. Well, the world's full of all kinds of interesting stuff, and it must be added, boring stuff too. And this interesting, boring world of ours, packed with information, is where we've been placed, so we may as well get to know it. However, it is one thing to get a lot of information in your noodle. It's an entirely different thing to know how to apply that information. When we talk about wisdom, we're talking about getting information and then knowing how to apply it. If we begin to apply this information, that will lead to certain attitudes. And if our attitudes are changed because we apply this information, the result is that our activities and our actions change. Now then, wisdom means getting information, knowing how to apply it, changing your attitudes, and accordingly having a different kind of behavior. Jesus grew in wisdom, and so do teenagers. Now then, it just depends where they get the information from, how they apply it, what it does to their attitudes, and what their actions will be. James says you can get it from below, you can get the wrong information, you can apply it to your life, it will affect your attitudes, and your actions will demonstrate where you're getting your information from. Or, he says, you can get your information from above, it will affect you as you apply it, your attitudes will be changed, and your activities will demonstrate it. This is an area of tremendous process for a teenager. He or she is beginning to learn things and to discover what it means to act upon them. Let me give you an example of this. This whole business of authority. Now, when you were a little kid growing up, you didn't know that was what it was called, but you knew how it felt. This authority stuff that parents seemed to be full of and always wielding upon you meant that you had to do what they said or else. Well, now, as time went on, you went to school and you learned about authority. You learned about how it is exercised, how it should be, how it shouldn't be. You learned about all kinds of stuff in history. You learned about all kinds of stuff in contemporary affairs. You looked at what happens when the authority of the army and the politicians, all this kind of stuff. And boy, you got so much information. You didn't know what to do with it. But then somebody said to you, by the way, all this information about authority is very important to you because you've got to decide how you handle authority. Well, now, when you had to decide how you would handle authority, that meant that you had to look at your own attitudes, for instance, towards your parents, or towards your teacher, or towards your coach. And as you had to look at your attitude toward your parents or your teacher or your coach, you began to discover that if you were taking seriously your understanding of authority, if you were honestly applying it to your life and it was changing your attitudes, then your actions would betray it. And there has to be progress in this regard. There has to be development. It is called growing up. That is the first area in which you need to regard yourself as a person in process. Secondly, growing physiologically. It says that Jesus grew in stature. That meant, of course, that his body went through certain changes. He used to talk like this. And then one day his voice started to crack and he tried to talk like this. And the problem was that sometimes when he was talking to a young lady and trying to impress her, he was trying to talk like this and he went like this. And he didn't know what to do with himself. He was covered with confusion. And she smirked, you see, because she thought it was so fun. But she was having her problems too, because her body was going through some changes, and she was very conscious of them. She was conscious that her friend's body was going through changes like hers, only more so. And she wanted the more so rather than the less so. And so now she doesn't know how to handle this thing. And the problem is that she is beginning to find that her body, and he is beginning to find that his body is changing. Not only that, there are sexual changes. For the girl, there's something happens that's very unnerving. She wished her mother had talked to her about it, but her mother didn't. Her mother assumed that she knew. How she assumed that she knew, she doesn't know, but her mother assumed that she knew. And when it happened, everybody was embarrassed and nobody knew what to do. And the boys, well, stuff happened there, and it was very awkward, and they didn't know why it was happening, and they didn't know who to talk to, so they went in the locker room, and they got a whole lot of locker room advice that was real junky and crude, and they're all embarrassed about the changes that are taking place. You can get stature changes, you get sex changes, and I hate to mention this in such polite company, but you get skin changes too. Zits. And if there's one thing that'll really get to a teenager, it's these horrible zits, particularly when you're really trying to impress somebody and these wretched things start erupting. Listen, kids, all that's happening is your pores are growing, and because they're growing, something's got to come through, and I guess that's all that's available at that particular time. Don't worry, this too shall pass. But whilst we can laugh about this, because we're through it, hopefully. Some of us just grow beards, in case we're not. Well, I've clearly forgotten what I was going to say. Now let's go on to the next thing. Thirdly, there are changes in terms of spiritual growth. Changes in terms of spiritual growth. It says here that Jesus increased in favor with God. Now let me remind you of something. Kids grow up believing basically what their parents believe. Have you got that? Kids grow up believing basically what their parents believe. Now then, if they've got parents who are divided in their belief, that makes it really tough for the kids. And so some of them know how to get along with both parents. They believe what one believes when they're with one and believe what the other one believes when they're with the other. But their belief is, to a very large extent, a belief of conformity. They want to please their parents. They want to please the people who are in authority over them. And so they more or less go along with the things that they're being taught. However, as they begin to grow up, they get into situations where their beliefs or their faith, which is born of conformity, begins to be battered by all kinds of challenges. They believed quite happily about something or other, and then some smart aleck came along and came up with some real big questions, and they didn't know the answer. They didn't know how to handle it, and it seems the most monumental thing, and they're absolutely overwhelmed with it. They are absolutely mortified they don't know the answer. You see, you believe in God, huh? Yeah. Could God make a stone so big he couldn't move it? Yes. Well, if he couldn't move it, then he's not God. No, well, I meant no. Well, if he couldn't make it, he's not God. Oh. Where did Cain get his wife from? What? Where did Cain get his wife from? Where did Cain get well, where did he? Well, how do you answer that? Well, the answer to that is, I'd tell you if I was able. Doesn't help much. Okay, kids, listen, this is all perfectly normal. Just hold on, it's all perfectly normal. You see, you grew up believing what your parents believed. You grew up believing pretty much what they told you to believe. Nothing wrong with that, provided they were telling you the right stuff. But then your faith came under scrutiny, it came under challenge. And you began to discover that you had to rethink everything until in the end, if you were really growing up, you came to the point of a faith built on conviction. Until you came to the point of a faith built on conviction. One of the most exciting things that can happen in your teenage years is that you look again at what you were told, you accept the challenges that can come, you address them all, and you arrive at some very, very solid convictions of your own. And one of the most thrilling things you'll ever come across is a young person who has examined everything, thought it through, and has come to a conclusion and knows not only what he believes, knows who he believes, and knows why he believes it. That doesn't mean he knows all the answers. Nobody knows all the answers. But what it does mean is he knows enough answers at the present time to know where the truth is, and he dares to take his stand upon it. That's growing up, kids. That's growing up. Now, you are a person in process, and spiritually, you should be proceeding through this faith born of conformity, through a faith that is battered by all kinds of challenge, into a situation where you're beginning to find a faith that is built on conviction. Work on it, but don't let anybody pretend that it's easy, because it really isn't. It can be very, very scary indeed. Fourthly, social growth, growing in favor with mankind. Now then, there are three factors here. Incidentally, those of you following through on the outline, it's a bit confused at this point. I telephoned it through on my way down to South America on Monday, and I'm just pleased we got it as close as we did. But under 4, this social growth, favor with man, there are three things to note. First of all, the social structures of parents. Then secondly, the social attractions of peers. And then the social challenges of the opposite sex. Now that you're going to grow up as a real social creature, now that's the last thing some teenagers want. They're so shy, they're so self-conscious, they just want to stand in a corner and watch the world go by. And others are real little social butterflies, and they can't wait to get out there and hit the high spots and do all the exciting stuff. Well, now then, this change that takes place is another of those processes through which you're going. And there are various factors to bear in mind. Number one, the social structures of your parents. You were born into this world without being consulted. You were brought into this world by people who did some stuff, and you were the result. You arrived here, they didn't discuss it with you, they didn't ask your permission. You came, you could not pick your family, you couldn't do anything. 18 inches of total squelchy dependence, you arrived on the scene. Immediately, social structures were built around you. Thank God for them. If they weren't, you wouldn't be here. These social structures were the structures that your parents decided for you. They gave you their values. You couldn't argue with them. They were there. That was all there was to it. They imposed their controls. You didn't even know you could rebel against them. And when you did find out you could rebel against them, you found out that their controls were stronger than your rebellion. They provided for you. And among the things they provided for you was a sense of security. So you were growing up. Now then, you grow up under the structure ordained by your parents. Their values become your values. Their controls are the things that determine your life. They tell you what time you can go out. They tell you what time to be in. Or else, if you're not in, then this will happen. They can mandate things, and they hold the controls. They impose upon you certain provisions, whether you want them or not. But the nice thing about it is there's a sense of security. You can always go home and know you'll be accepted. Now then, as you begin to grow up socially, another factor comes into play. It is the social attraction of your peers. There comes a time in your life, it's scary for you, and even more scary for your parents, when do you know what happens? You don't want to be with your parents. You don't want to be seen walking in a shopping mall with your mom. You don't want to go on vacation with them. You don't want to sit in church with them. Ooh. Put me behind a pillar. Just put me anywhere. But no. Now, what's happening? Something is more important to you now than parents. Now, it isn't that you're altogether down on parents. They come in very useful. Very useful indeed. It's just that parents are kind of a bit out of it. I mean, let's face it. The Bible says we have 70 years and 10. That's about 70. Halfway to 70 is 35. 36 is over the hill and on the decline. Now, your parents don't believe it, but you know it's true. You can do math. So 36 and over being on the decline, you know they're out of touch. But there are some people who are really in touch, and they are cool. They are your peers. Now then, what's more fun? To be with the overhill crowd or to be with the up-and-coming crowd? Obvious. Nobody has any problem answering that. What is more fun is being with your peers than being with the fuddy-duddy old parents. However, that works super. It works really great if your parents and your peers are in total agreement. And I don't think it has ever been known to happen. Now, herein lies the problem. You see, you're growing up. You're wanting to shake away a little bit from the parental control. You wanted to get away just a little bit from your parents' values, and you're wanting to get into the excitement of peers, the experimentation of the kids. I mean, your parents, you say, hey, you know, wouldn't it be neat if we did such and such a thing? And they say, we tried it, it doesn't work. Well, you don't want to hear, we tried it, it doesn't work. You want to find out if it works. And that kid down the street seems to think it works. And anyway, if it doesn't work, so what? Why does everything have to work? Why can't you just do it? Now you've got a problem. Because the peers are offering you excitement. The peers are offering you experimentation. The peers are offering you the chance to belong to a whole new group. And the parents, you're not too sure about them. There's some tension here. There's a third factor now comes into being, and that is the whole business of the opposite sex. Now, you grew up knowing that there were such things as the opposite sex. You weren't sure what they were, but you knew they were to be detested and hated. But then something happened. Something happened, like those nasty, creepy little chrysalises that hang on trees, sometimes turn into butterflies. You can't believe it. That gangly little kid down the road who used to have braces and zits is sort of blossoming. And you say, wow, what happened there? And you sort of try and walk around and carry her books or something. And for some strange reason, she seems to like it. But sometimes she doesn't want it, and she goes for that football player. And the hurt, and the disappointment, and the feeling of rejection, it's just awful. You don't know what to do with it. Tell you, all this stuff is called growing up socially. You've got the parents on the one hand, you're trying to keep the values right and the controls there and make sure that everything goes the way it should. And you've got these peers with all the excitement and experimentation, and you give anything to be accepted by them, just about anything anyway. And then all these first love affairs. And you're all torn up inside. It's tough being a kid. I have a phenomenal memory. I can remember way back when I was a teenager, some of these things. It's called growth. Listen, kids, listen, teenagers, you're a person in process. But remember that you're supposed to be progressing as you're a person in process. You're supposed to be progressing in the whole area of wisdom and stature and favor with God and favor with man. Now then, let's look at the second thing. Because you're a person in process, you are by definition a person under pressure. Let's take these psychological changes for a minute. We talk about all this stuff about getting information, applying it, and having it change your attitudes, and then making your actions different. What it really means is you've got to work into your system of life now the knowledge of how to behave. You've got to behave in different ways. You ever notice young moms? Boy, young moms are marvelous. The more I see of young mums with little kids, the more amazed I am at what they can do. Have you ever seen a young mum in a supermarket with a kid that is yowling and screaming and raising Cain because she wants one of those things that are being carefully placed at the checkout counter? For impulse buying. It's not mother's impulse, it's the kids. It's blackmail. It's kind of blackmail. Kids yelling and screaming and then throwing a tantrum, and mother in the end grabs hold of this kid and threatens all kinds of dreadful things to this kid. Out of the corner of her mouth. You can see her mouth working out the corner. Boy, young mum's mouths can go right round to one ear. What's going to happen to this kid is nobody's business when she gets that kid home. But the kid won't wait to get home, and mother can't wait to get home, so she grabs the kid. Have you ever noticed how you can grab a little kid by one arm and swing it around, and it doesn't matter? They throw them across the supermarket, and then you hear the classic line, act your age. Which is exactly, of course, what the child is doing. What mother wants him to do is act her age. Now there's the problem. There's the problem. How do you act your age? How do you, as a growing teenager, with all the different pressures upon you, the values of your parents, the attraction of your peers, and now these strange new relationships with the opposite sex, how do you pull them all together, and how do you act your age? That's the question with which so many are struggling. So many young people are so disappointed with themselves. So many young people are so anxious about how they're behaving. So many are so concerned about how they're going to be perceived. And therein lies the pressure under which they're living. What about this physiological pressure? Handling these sexual urges, these strange things that you suddenly begin to imagine, these strange thoughts that you begin to have, these strange desires that begin to come your way. You begin to ask yourself, hey, should I be thinking that, or is that weird? Is it sinful? And the kind of stuff that you can do with your body. Now, I can't say much about this right now because there are adults here. If he was just a teenager, I'd go into minute detail. But, I've got to understand that there are grown folks here who can't handle that kind of stuff. Kids can. Kids can. Kids, make sure that as you're going through all these pressures as far as your own sexual development is concerned, make sure you're getting some good advice. There's a lot of junky stuff around. A lot of junky stuff around. Don't get it from Prince. I'm serious. Don't get it from Prince. You know why I say that? It has been estimated that through grades 7 through 12, the typical teenager has the Walkman strapped on for 10,560 hours, while during that same period, she listens to her teachers for 11,000 hours. In other words, there's a very high possibility that your kids are listening to the likes of Prince and Madonna and Springsteen and all kinds of other people for as long as they're listening to their teachers. And the sum total in grades 7 through 12 could be the astronomical figure of 11,000 hours. And you better believe what they're saying. Parents, make sure that you know the lyrics of Prince's songs. Parents, make absolutely certain that you know what Madonna stands for. Even the New Republic has an article, that's what I'm quoting from here. The New Republic has an article this week on Madonna and says that she is a skilled expert at straddling innocence and decadence. What a superlative insight into Madonna. A skilled expert at straddling innocence and decadence. There is such ambiguity in Madonna. It's the 13-year-old girls who are going for her. And the ambiguity of the innocence and the decadence is so subtle that adults can't figure her out, and the kids are going for it, hook, line, and sinker. Kids, listen, be careful. Be careful. There's all kinds of input you can get in these strange sexual changes that require some good, straightforward sexual thinking. And you won't get it from them. You won't get it from them. Did you know that the record for which Prince won a Grammy and the movie for which he gained an Oscar has a song in it about a girl masturbating with a magazine in a hotel lobby? And that is normal fare now. You get Oscars and Grammys for that. And that's what the kids are listening to. Now, all the kids are listening to it, so of course the kids are going to listen to it. And it isn't a case of coming down with like a ton of bricks on them and telling them, hey, you can't do this and hey, you can't do that. Just help the kids sort their sexuality out. And recognize the tremendous pressure they're under as they try to grow physiologically. This whole business of understanding the trauma that the kids go through as they're growing up physiologically. I read an interesting thing this week. In the British Journal of Plastic Surgery, there's a report of 2 surgeons doing research on 11,000 prison inmates, all in for serious violent crimes. And this is what they discovered. They discovered of those 11,000 inmates, prison inmates, there for serious crimes, 60% had surgically correctable facial deformities. 60% of them had surgically correctable facial deformities. The average in the population is 20%. In other words, if you go into a prison and you find prisoners there guilty of violent crime, they are 3 times more likely to have something wrong facially than the person who isn't there. The people who researched this came to this conclusion, that one reason for criminal behavior is the rejection that has come to many young people in their adolescent years because of the way they looked. Because you see, the way we look, particularly in those traumatic, pressurized, changing days, is so important to us that it can have profound impact upon us. It's not easy, kids. It's a pressurized business, growing up psychologically and physiologically. But then what about growing up spiritually? You come to that stage, listen, teenagers, some of you are there now, some of you have been there for a while. You come to that stage of doubt. And the trouble about your doubt is that you feel so guilty even having a doubt. It'd be bad enough having doubts, but now to feel guilty about having doubts, and you feel so guilty about having doubts that you daren't talk to anybody about it, because if you do talk to anybody about it, you think they're really going to come down on you. Now, I know exactly how this feels. There was a man called George Thompson gave a talk to our youth group when I was a kid. He was a Scotsman. And this is how his talk went. He said, young people, one day the trumpet will sound. Because he was a Scotsman, he knew exactly how to say trumpet. And he used the old King James English expression, the last trump. He said, the last trump will all go to be with the Lord. Now, young people, he said, remember, it's the last trump. Don't try to go before the last trump. No matter how much you want to see the Lord. I was sitting there listening to this. Obvious question came into my mind. If we mustn't go before the last trump, we better make sure which is the last trump. Which means we need to know how many trumps there are. So I went up to him, as true as I'm standing here, you know me, as true as I'm standing here, honestly, innocently, I went up to him and said, Mr. Thompson, you said we mustn't try to go before the last trump. That's right, Stuart. I said, well, if we mustn't go before the last trump, we'll need to know how many there are. How many will there be, Mr. Thompson? And he said, don't be impertinent. So I thought, he doesn't know. And you know something? He didn't know. In actual fact, he was talking a lot of nonsense. And he daredn't admit that a teenager was just thinking a bit harder than he was. Listen, kids, don't ever be afraid to think about your faith. Don't worry about questions about your faith. Come out with your questions about your faith and get what answers you can, and don't expect answers for everything, because nobody has all the answers, and if they pretend they have, find somebody else. Because you see, this whole business of growing in the knowledge of God and growing in favor with the Lord is so vast, so comprehensive, that there's no way you can figure it out, and there's no way anybody else can figure it all out. But boy, can you grow. And make sure that you do. But it's pressurized. And finally, this pressure that comes from social pressure. When I said finally, I didn't mean it's nearly over. This pressure, the social pressure we're under. This whole business of the desire for independence. You know, that's good. It's really neat. You come into the world totally dependent, remember? You can't remember it, but you've read about it. You came into the world totally dependent. They did everything for you. You were this way, 18 inches. You stayed this way for a while, going this way and this way and this way. And all of a sudden, for no discernible reason, you stopped growing this way and you tilted up. Absolutely amazing. And then started growing this way. And you keep growing this way, and then a remarkable thing will happen. Do you know what will happen? You start growing this way. Then eventually gravity will take over. That's what happened. You come in all dependent. Now you can't stay dependent. When you find a 17-year-old kid walking through the shopping mall holding his mummy's hand, saying, "Mummy, can we go shopping?" Folks, he's got a problem. You know what his problem is? He's holding her hand. She's his problem. For some reason or other, she isn't letting him have the independence he needs. You see, we go from dependence to independence to mature interdependence. One of the great things about your kids growing up, and you kids, you'll find this hard to believe, but parents really love it when they see their young people growing up to become adults who can become their friends. Dependence, independence, interdependence. That's where you're going. Now, you see, it's difficult, this independence thing, because sometimes Mummy and Daddy don't want to let you go. And sometimes Mummy and Daddy don't want to let you go quite as far as you want to go. Or sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes Mummy and Daddy are so fed up with you, they say, "Oh, get out of here." And you really don't want to go. You see, there's a balance here. The balance here. Now, sometimes what you regard as perfectly normal attempts at independence are perceived as rebellion by your parents. That's easy to understand. When I first came over to America, first summer I came over to America, a lady came up to me. She said, "Mr. Briscoe, do you have a 4th of July in England?" I said, "No, madam, we go straight from the 3rd to the 5th. So I thought I'd better find out what she was talking about. I found out about the Declaration of Independence, July the 4th, 1776. You see, I had learnt my history in England. And what was called independence over here, do you know what it was called over there? Rebellion. When I got up on that 4th of July morning in this conference center in Florida, my room was festooned with American flags. I went to breakfast, the table was covered with American flags. My plate had a copy of the Declaration of Independence on it. I was just bombarded with this independence stuff. And then I had to get up and give a Bible study. So I said, "Friends, I understand that this is a special day in the history of the United States. I have prepared a special message for you. Today I will talk on rebellion." Here's the question. When is independence rebellion? Just depends which side of the water you're on. When is a terrorist a freedom fighter? Depends which side of the water you're on. When is a teenager who perhaps quite normally is just pushing as far as he or she can to get a little bit of independence, when is she being rebellious? That's a question that the teenager and the parent better sit down and figure out. But always remember this, there's every opportunity in the world for teenagers who have every right to get a little independence to become downright outward rebellious. And it won't do, kids. That is not going to help you get where you need to go. But the pressure's on. Psychological pressure, physiological pressure, spiritual pressure, social pressure. You're a person under pressure. But you're a person with potential. You're a person with potential. I've got a real favorite passage in the Old Testament. Ecclesiastes 12. Ecclesiastes 12 says, "Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, because before the days of trouble come, and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them." What it's saying here is this: hey kids, you've got so much potential, and the important thing is, while you're young, going through the changes, remember you were created for something. That's what it's saying, because the time will come when you'll be so old and so decrepit that you won't be able to do much anyway. The time to do it is when you're young. Now it goes on in this passage to describe what it's like when you get so old and decrepit you can hardly be what you were created to be. It's a neat passage. It's poetry, but it's hilarious. It says in verse 3, "The time will come when the keepers of the house shall tremble." There they are. And the strong men shall stoop.
Here it is. When the grinders shall cease because they're few. Here they are. Those who look through windows grow dim. They need bifocals on their windows. And then it goes on to say, men will rise up at the sound of the birds. Can't sleep. But all their songs will be faint. Is that a siren or a thrush? When men will be afraid of heights. You're not getting me in one of those newfangled aeroplanes. And the almond tree will blossom. And the grasshopper becomes a burden. Agatha, help me lift this grasshopper.
And desire no longer is stirred. That's what it says, kids. That's what it says. Now, what's the point of all this? Hey, the point of all this is don't wait till you get to that stage to be what you were created to be. Realize that when you're young, you're created to be something and do something and get on with it then. And there are three lovely pictures of it. Verse 6, remember him before the silver cord is severed or the golden bowl is broken. In those days, they had golden bowls full of oil that they lit, suspended on a silver cord. And then the silver cord would wear thin, and the golden bowl would drop, and the oil would spill, and the light would go out. And that's what your life's like, teenagers. While you're young, you've got a good old strong silver cord there, and a bright, shiny bowl, and it's full of all kinds of enthusiastic vigor, and God can set it alight and do something, but don't wait till the old cord snaps and the oil spilled out. That's dumb. And it also says that the time will come when the pitcher is shattered at the spring. When you get a new spring, you get some real nice pitchers, nice shape, nice painting on it. Get the water in, carry it around on your head, take it to all the people. It's neat. Then the old pitcher gets cracked, you put it on your head, water runs out all over the place. This dumb pitcher. Well, you see, you get so old, you're like an old pitcher leaking all over the place. But when you're young, that pitcher's in great shape. Carry some water out where you're going to do some good. And it says, in the time will come when the wheel is broken at the well. Water coming out the well, you see where the wheel is turning it up there, but then the old wheel begins to fall apart and cranks and groans and creaks and collapses. Can't get water out the well anymore. You'll get to that stage when you're old, you can't do much. While you're young, boy, that wheel can turn, that bowl can glow, that pitcher can carry. I heard a neat story on Monday night in Colombia, South America. Lady said, my husband was taking our 11-year-old son in a canoe up the Amazon. He said they were visiting a lot of tribal groups there. He said wherever they went, the people came out of their little huts, and they said to my husband, so-and-so is sick, would you please come in and pray for them? She said my 11-year-old son went in with his daddy and stood there as he watched his daddy put hands on people and pray over them. And in the end, the 11-year-old boy said to his daddy, Daddy, why don't they go to a doctor? And his daddy said, because there isn't a doctor within 1,000 miles of here. And the 11-year-old boy said, Daddy, when I grow up, I'm going to be a doctor. And the 11-year-old boy who said, when I grow up to be a doctor, met me at the airport in Colombia on Monday night. And now he is a plastic and reconstruction surgeon. Teenagers, you are so full of potential. You are so full of potential. Look at yourself like that. Oh, of course you're going to have fun. Of course you're going to be zany. Of course you're going to be crazy. But through it all, be serious. Consider yourself. Well, that's the end of my first point. There are only 2 to go now. I've just time to touch on them. Teenager, control yourself. Listen, real quick. Avoid developing unhealthy attitudes. Control them. As you are growing in wisdom, watch out for unhealthy attitudes. They come so easy, you can pick them up all over the place. You watch these athletes out there misbehaving themselves, you mirror them. You watch your heroes in the videos at night, you model them. They've got some bad attitudes. You don't need to follow that. You grow in wisdom. Avoid engaging in illegitimate activities. It's the easiest thing to get into it easily. Even your parents will put a keg of beer down in your basement after the ball game so you can have your friends in. But where will your parents be when you turn into an alcoholic? Avoid engaging in illegitimate activities and avoid drifting into spiritual apathy. If you're having your problems and you're having your struggles and you're having your doubts, don't sit on them. Bring them out and talk about them. And avoid embracing unhelpful alliances. If there's one thing more than another that is likely to destroy a young person, it's getting in with the wrong crowd. Peer pressure doesn't have to be bad. Peer pressure can be positive. Put yourself in the position where you've got some good, healthy kids around you who are going to build you up rather than pull you down. And teenager, concern yourself with the development of yourself as a person. Be concerned about your physical well-being. Make sure you're establishing some solid spiritual values. And nurture some lasting relationships. Concern yourself with these things. Teenagers, it's not easy being a teenager because you're going through all kinds of change. You're a person in process. You're under pressure, but you're so full of potential, you wouldn't believe it. Make sure you go the right way. Let's pray. There may be some young people here this morning, as some no longer very young people here this morning, who would like to pray a very simple prayer. Here it is. Just as I am, young, strong, and free, to be the best that I can be. O Lamb of God, I come to thee. Have you got that? Just as I am, young, strong, and free, to be the best that I can be. O Lamb of God, I come to thee. Dear Lord, hear the prayers of young people, of young hearts, even now. And bless them as they wait on you. In Christ's name, amen.